There's a very specific kind of sentence that Americans hear every election cycle now. This is the most important election of our lifetime, which is impressive because at this point, my lifetime apparently has included 30 or so consecutive civilization-ending events. I'm starting to feel like one of those medieval peasants standing in the town square while a guy with a bell screams, "Repent, for the end is near!" And then 4 years later, he's back like, okay, I was off on the timing, but this is the real apocalypse. At some point, you stop asking whether the village is on fire and start asking, why is the fire department selling flamethrowers? And that's the one thing I keep coming back to when people tell me, look, I agree with your structural criticisms, but right now, we're in crisis mode. Because I understand that instinct, I really do. I'm a Marine veteran. Crisis mode is very real. When something is actively exploding, you do not hold a symposium on long-term procurement reform. You put out the fire first. That's just rational behavior. But what happens when the people in charge discover that terrified people are easier to manage than thoughtful people? What happens when temporary emergency measures become the permanent operating system of the electorate? Because, let's be honest, America hasn't had a normal election in decades. Every election is democracy ends if these people win. The economy collapses if those people win. Civilization dies if you don't vote correctly, and your children will live in a radioactive crater made entirely of pronouns and inflation. At this point, our national bird shouldn't be the eagle, it should be the panic button. And both major parties participate in this. They just alternate costumes. One side says, we are the last defense against fascism. The other side says, we are the last defense against socialism. Meanwhile, the average American is sitting in a Walmart parking lot, stress-eating tacos, and wondering why insulin costs more than jet fuel. That's not governance. That's hostage negotiation with extra campaign emails. And here's where it gets weird, because I don't think most voters are stupid. I just think that most voters are exhausted. There's a difference. Because when people feel threatened, they naturally narrow their choices down to survival options. That's just human nature. Which brings me to what may be the dumbest useful metaphor I've ever heard. Imagine you're Indiana Jones. You've got the golden idol. The giant boulder is rolling toward you. Death is imminent. John Williams is screaming through the soundtrack. Sweat is everywhere and khaki levels are critical. And ahead of you are two holes in the ground. Now, if you jump into either hole, the boulder passes over you and you survive. But then you remember, both holes are filled with the most horrifying, foul-smelling, rotten sludge imaginable. One hole is filled halfway. The other one is filled all the way to the top. So naturally, you jump in the halfway full hole, because of course you do. That's just rational decision-making. You made the best choice available from the options you believed you had. But then something fascinating happens. After the boulder rolls past, people stop talking about why are there two filth holes in this temple. Instead, they are building their identities around defending the particular hole that they jumped into. Well, my hole only goes up to my armpits. Oh yeah? Well, your hole smells worse. Actually, studies show that your hole has slightly more bone fragments. And now everyone's arguing chest deep in fermented corpse soup while acting like this is sophisticated political philosophy. Welcome to modern American politics. We have normalized emergency choices so thoroughly that people no longer question the structure creating the emergency. And if you do question it, people look at you like you're asking the boulder to respect your pronouns. No time, boulder! And again, this is important. The fear is not fake. That's the trap. The threats that people perceive are often very real. But if fear becomes the permanent mechanism by which political loyalty is maintained, then the system never has to improve. It only has to keep one side scarier than the other. And that's an incredibly low bar for a civilization allegedly built on self-government. And you can already see the incentives everywhere. Politicians fundraise off of panic. Media companies profit from outrage. Algorithms reward emotional escalation. Activists gain influence through catastrophe framing because calm people don't doom scroll for 6 hours, and a citizenry with perspective is just bad for quarterly earnings. You know what's really hard to manipulate? A population capable of saying, okay, yes, this problem is serious, but I would still like a functioning institution, accountability, and candidates who aren't emotional support animals for party machinery. And that's dangerous thinking right there, because once voters stop reacting like hostages, the duopoly actually has to compete. And that's the part that nobody wants to talk about. If one party is always the only moral option, and the other party is always the only safe option, then when exactly do either of them have to become the best option? When do they have to start earning anything beyond fear compliance? See, I'm a libertarian, but this isn't even fundamentally about libertarianism. It's about the incentives. If voters continually communicate, you do not have to solve structural problems as long as you keep me terrified of the alternative, then structurally, why would the system ever stop manufacturing emergencies? That would be like asking a casino to voluntarily remove slot machines because gambling addiction feels unethical. Newsflash, the addiction is the business model. And I know some people hear this and think, so what? You're saying that both parties are exactly the same? No, that's a lazy analysis. Different administrations produce different outcomes. Policies matter. Personnel matters. Courts matter. Regulations matter. Elections have consequences. But acknowledging differences between the wholes does not obligate me to pretend that the temple architecture is healthy. And one of the things that I've learned, especially being autistic, is that I seem to have a lower tolerance for socially normalized contradictions. Apparently, a lot of people can emotionally adapt to systems that make no coherent sense. Meanwhile, my brain's over here thinking, excuse me, why are we treating permanent crisis psychology as a patriotic virtue? Because I can't do it. And honestly, I don't think the country can keep doing it either. Not for very much longer. Because eventually, permanent emergency culture breaks people psychologically. You can already see it. The exhaustion, the cynicism, the political tribalism, the emotional burnout, the distrust of institutions, and the collapse of social trust. We've turned citizenship into a series of cortisol spikes. And no wonder everybody's so angry all the time. We're asking people to live in a constant state of civic triage. And the saddest part is that most Americans are trying to do the right thing. Seriously, most people are not cartoon villains. They're just trying to protect their families, preserve stability, and make responsible choices with the information that they have. I respect that deeply. But responsible people also have to ask hard questions eventually. Questions like, why does the system perpetually produce lesser evil options? Why are crises becoming the default political atmosphere? Why do institutions seem incapable of resolving foundational problems? Why are Americans constantly told that they must accept dysfunction to prevent catastrophe? At some point, adulthood requires more than just choosing which sludge hole feels survivable. It requires asking why the temple keeps manufacturing boulders. And maybe, just maybe, our job is refusing to consider survival with health. Because the "it's only up to here" narrative is not the same thing as freedom. It's just adaptation. And a country that only knows how to survive emergencies eventually forgets how to build anything worth protecting in the first place.